hear addiction, they think it's one.
Nicotine. Cocaine.
Games.
Addiction is when your body needs whatever it is that you're taking, whether it be like the caffeine within coffee, your body starts to get adjusted to it because of chemicals.
This couch is your brain, and these are all the different chemicals inside of it. For example, this would be dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine and serotonin are related to feeling rewarded and happy and other things like that, because the lack of serotonin can cause depression and other illnesses related to that. There are also other ones that make you feel content and just normal, like they're normal. And others can make you feel hungry or thirsty or whatever other bodily functions. But there's also chemicals that can make you feel sad. And these chemicals can overpower or make these other happy chemicals seem less important. Because of this, people might turn to substances. This substance could be anything from food, drugs, gaming, whatever. But what it does is, for the first time in a while, they start kind of feeling happy. And they might take more of it to feel even happier. And this causes an addiction, because all of the chemicals inside of it makes them feel good, and so they want more. Addiction is in a lot of forms. The most common or most thought of is drugs, things like cocaine, heroin, stuff like that. But there's also like medicine drugs, like opioids, like painkillers, because a lot of people are getting addicted to that, and it's killing a lot of people. But also a common drug is caffeine and coffee and other things like sports drinks and energy drinks. That is the thing that a lot of people are addicted to, because it like makes them hyper and makes them feel good. And then there's nicotine, which is in a lot of like things like cigarettes, Juuls, like e-cigarettes. But there's also like things like gaming, which a lot of like younger people are getting addicted to. This can be anything from like having an Xbox to like a Candy Crush. And there's also just cell phone addiction, which is usually in social media, but also, as I said, it can be in things like Candy Crush or word search games. Whatever it is, people can be addicted to it.
Is addiction always bad?
Addiction can be bad, depending on what it is that you're addicted to. Most of the time it is a negative effect of what you're addicted to, because you can become addicted to a lot of, like gambling, you can become addicted to drugs, you can become addicted to different types of any type of thing that you can have, food, and it can be bad depending on what it is that you're doing.
Why does our body become addicted to something?
Okay, you have dopamine within your brain that signals whenever you eat something like chocolate or whatever, your brain is telling you that your brain is telling you that you want to keep eating that's a good thing, and it keeps sending that signal. So the more signals that it gets with that, it continues to make you crave whatever it is that you're getting addicted to.
What are some problems with being addicted?
Problems with becoming addicted, especially if it's addiction to drugs or alcohol, it does affect everybody else in your family and your community, not just yourself. It adds a lot of different things within your families to where you can't talk to them. There's no communication skills or anything within the addictions, because the addiction becomes more important than everybody else around them.
Why is it hard to stop an addiction?
You're going to have to kind of retrain your brain to be able to get this addiction to go away. You would have to start doing things differently and removing yourself from those situations in order to be able to get your brain to function the way it needs to, so you can get over those addictions. And a lot of times people don't want to deal with the pain and the suffering that they kind of go through depending on what it is that they're addicted to.
What are some problems with being addicted to a drug?
Addiction really can bleed over into so many aspects of someone's life. So it can cause problems from anything related to someone's health, even just whatever they do normally, like if they go to school or if they have a job, that can be impacted as well. It can also have legal effects, because many times drugs are illegal and people can face legal consequences. In addition, it drives people to sometimes do things like steal for money for drugs and have other legal consequences. It can also cause problems just even with people's relationships in their families, their friends. So it can just actually affect all the different aspects of a person's life.
One of the problems with addiction is overdosing.
What is overdosing?
So overdosing is when someone takes a substance, it may be knowingly or unknowingly, they have too much of that substance in their body, and so it can have different effects depending on what the substance is. But many people incorrectly assume that you die from an overdose. You don't always die from an overdose. So even something like a drug like heroin, you don't necessarily always die. Some people can be saved through medication, but it causes people to get very, very sick and sometimes need medical attention, like have to go to the emergency room. And it can even happen with a drug like marijuana. There's actually marijuana overdoses where people get really sick. They might vomit, they might pass out or faint, and they might not be able to talk or communicate, for example. But each type of overdose is going to be different depending on what the substances are involved.
Another problem is withdrawal.
What are withdrawal systems?
So withdrawal symptoms are associated with addiction. When someone becomes addicted to a substance, they often experience withdrawal symptoms, and they can be, we tend to think of physical withdrawal symptoms, but there actually can also be psychological or mental withdrawal symptoms. So these are symptoms that are usually not pleasant, that someone experiences after the drug effects have worn off. So like with a drug like alcohol, there are many withdrawal symptoms that are physical, like you could visibly see someone shaking. People can actually experience hallucinations and a lot of really unpleasant side effects or withdrawal symptoms. But even for a drug like marijuana, where people think there aren't withdrawal symptoms, there actually are. They're just not as many really physical ones. But even things like being irritable, difficulty sleeping, insomnia, that kind of thing, they're not as noticeable perhaps, and you could blame them on something else, but it actually often is related to the drug.
What is your advice to people who are addicted?
Well, my advice is to get help, because just like any other addiction is a disease, and just like any other disease, there is treatment and there is help, but people usually can't solve the problem on their own. Unfortunately, there's a lot of shame around addiction, and I wish there wasn't, because we don't make people feel bad for having cancer or diabetes, so why should we try to, as a society, make people feel bad for having an addiction, and instead just offer to support them and tell them that there is help? But usually you need counseling or the help of medical professionals, parents, counselors, that kind of thing. But many people do recover from addictions with the right help.
How do you know if someone is addicted?
So, the biggest place to start is if you notice that their substance use is impacting or getting in the way of functioning. So that might be social functioning, it could be school functioning, it could be academic functioning. So there's a lot of different ways that addiction can impact functioning, and if it does, then that's when I would say it's starting to become a problem.
How do you help someone who is addicted?
The biggest way I think to help someone who's addicted is to listen, to ask questions, to be understanding, to validate the person's experience, that it makes sense that they're going through what they're going through, and really just to be someone who's there to listen.
How can you persuade someone who's addicted to find help?
So persuading someone, I think, is really hard. I think you can be a source of support. So going with a person to ask for help, looking stuff up with them like online, talking to a counselor with the person, those are all good ways to try to get the person to look at getting help.
How can you help yourself if you become addicted?
So if you are faced with being addicted to a substance, then the first step is to admit that there's a problem, admit that you want to make some changes, and then go ask for help.
Thank you. If you're struggling with addiction, go to these resources.